Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us at this panel. We will be talking about a very timely issue, a very big question, both in Brussels and in the European neighborhoods. It's enlargement. My name is Maria Alesina. I'm from the European Liberal Forum, one of the organizers of the Freedom Games. And today I have with me a very interesting and complementary panel of speakers. Some of them are online. I will present everyone in a few seconds. And first, just to give the overall view on the importance of this topic, enlargement of the European Union for a long time has been considered one of the most successful policies of the EU, the one that brought the most added value, the biggest input, and opened new horizons for the European Union. But then, for a few years, it was considered already a stalemate, a stalled policy, which is not going to go anywhere, which is not going to move forward, because the European Union was set to become too big, too complicated, and new members, despite their own will, were not getting any clarity on the prospects of them joining the EU. And then the war in Ukraine has happened, which gave a completely new boost, a very unfortunate and sad boost to the wake-up call for the European Union. But that's how it usually happens with the EU. The European Union evolves through crisis, and this huge crisis put back on the agenda the question of enlargement, the question of accepting new members and re-envisioning the whole concept of the European Union. And this is something which we'll be talking about today. The practicalities of the enlargement, the political situation around this question, and also all the scope of questions which this issue brings up on the European agenda about how the EU envisions itself and how to move ahead. So as I said, with me today we have already 3 speakers. We might have the fourth one joining, hopefully, if everything goes well with the connection. With me on the stage, I have Dariusz Rosati, a member of the Polish Sejm, a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, also former member of the European Parliament. and a long-time proponent of the enlargement of the European Union. Also, we have Mira Kaneva from Bulgaria. She's the Associate Professor of Political Science from Sofia University, and also one of the authors and contributors to the European Liberal Forum's work on the enlargement, and she has many ideas on the practicalities of this very complicated issue. Yes, now I see that we have two Romanian speakers connected online. Very happy to have everyone on board. We have Kira Rudik from Ukraine. She's a Ukrainian politician, member of the Ukrainian parliament, and leader of the oppositionary Golos party, and also vice president of the ALDE party, European Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. And finally, we have Goran Buldioski, the Executive Director of Open Society Europe and Central Asia, a very well-known expert on enlargement. So we have two politicians, two experts. Very much welcome to everyone. And I hope we'll have a very interesting discussion. So first of all, I would like to start with a question to everyone, one after another, because this is a very interesting moment in European discussions on this question, because throughout the past couple of years we had the candidate countries, the long-standing candidate countries from the Western Balkans, and then recent candidate countries, Ukraine and Moldova, very much pushing for the enlargement on their part. And Brussels and European capitals were seen as resistant to this big change. And what I personally see from Brussels in the past couple of months, I see a very big shift in the narrative inside the Brussels. We see the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, talking about enlargement. We see French President Emmanuel Macron talking about enlargement. We have this very big prominence of this topic inside the EU, and everyone seems to be agreeing that enlargement needs to happen. The question is how and when. And I would like to ask all of you, what is your perception, because we have different countries, different visions. What is the political narrative around this topic inside the countries which you work on and represent, and on the overall level from the center of the EU? I think I can start in the order in which I introduce the speakers. Dariusz, if you...
Yes, good afternoon, and thanks for the invitation, and thank you for the introduction. As you rightly pointed out, I think we've seen a radical change of attitude in Brussels over the last, let's say, over the last year or year and a half, and this has been, of course, influenced largely by the events in the East, that is Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And since then, both the enlargement issue has become one of the top points of the debate, European debate, Euro-strategic debate. But apart from that, we also have, and this is not only because, of course, in the center of this debate was Ukraine's future and Ukraine's chances for membership in the European Union, but because of that, also the discussion about enlargement towards Western Balkans, as you also mentioned, accelerated. Because if we look at this process, then we see that practically integration of the Western Balkans has come to a stalemate over the last several years. There is not so much progress, there is not so much enthusiasm, both on the side of the EU and also on the side of the countries interested. But the Russian aggression, I think, has changed completely the environment, the political environment, and what we have witnessed in Brussels was I must say, a very dramatic, astonishing even, political unity among all EU member states when it comes to the prospects of enlargement. So now almost everybody is in favor. But of course, the question is, as you said, how and when? And I think that it is easy to make political declarations. Of course, we've heard a lot of declarations by European leaders, not all of them, of course, but the most important ones. They, of course, in principle, support the idea of enlargement, including Ukraine and also Western Balkans, and also Moldova, perhaps Georgia also in the near future. But after these, there must be some moment when deeds have to follow the words, of course. And here we see that there may be some difficulties on this process. I would like to simply start with saying that in order for enlargement, especially in the case of Ukraine, but also the other countries, candidate countries, some preconditions have to be met. Preconditions both on the side of candidate countries and on the side of the EU. Because when we look at the current status quo, then we can say that neither Ukraine or other countries, nor the EU is ready for the enlargement. On the part of the candidate countries, the process of reforming their economies, of adjusting their institutional structure to the standards, to the European standards, improving the conditions for competitive market economy, improving the judiciary system, fighting against corruption. This is all, still in the process. And clearly, when we read the reports by the European Commission, where we can read to what extent the countries, they meet the required criteria for membership, the famous Copenhagen criteria, then we see that none of them actually at this point fulfills these criteria, and still there is a lot of work to be done on the part of those countries. The other important issue is that also the economic situation in those countries is not so, I would say, favorable, especially, of course, we have in mind Ukraine, which is in the state of war. And this is, I would say, another important or critical complication in this process, which we have to keep in mind. Never in its history, European Union has, admitted a country as member which was in the state of open war with another country. So here we are on, I would say, uncharted waters, and we have to find a way in which we could help Ukraine and open the door to Ukraine without knowing actually when and with what result the war will finally end. But as I said, there are also obstacles on the side of the EU, because the EU is also not ready to accept new members. And what I have in mind are two areas, actually. The first one is the EU budget. If we agree that we should proceed with quick accession of Ukraine and other countries, then the EU budget has to increase dramatically. Only the reconstruction of Ukraine, according to the studies that have been made, reconstruction of Ukraine would probably require at least 600 or 700 billion euro. And this is, as I said, a tentative figure, because the damages which are done by the Russian aggressor, they are accumulating every day, practically. So this is a huge amount of money, and the question arises to what extent the Western countries can be ready to finance this. Of course, we welcome the declaration by Ursula von der Leyen and by the European Union that a special fund for Ukraine, Ukrainian facility is going to be created within the next budget, but this will cover only 50 billion euro, which is, of course, largely insufficient to cover all the needs. And remember, we have also other countries that are queuing to get the membership, and they also will require quite substantial financial assistance. So the budget is number one problem. If the member states don't agree on the radical extension of the budget, and if they don't agree that they have to tax their citizens in order to help Ukraine and other members and the other candidate countries, then we cannot proceed forward. And imagine Prime Minister Orban, who wants to tax his citizens, saying that, okay, this money will go for the support of Ukraine. Now, imagine our government and the Prime Minister who comes on TV and says, okay, look, we have to impose a special tax, we have to support our Ukrainian friends. This may be difficult. And these are just examples. And the second area of problem, of course, is the need to institutional reform in the European Union. We know from the signals that are coming from the capitals that under the present institutional setup, there can be no enlargement. This has been made clear by the French president, by the German chancellor, and by many other leaders. The European Union, if it is to enlarge, to include 7, 8, 9 countries from the Balkans and from the East, so increasing the number of member states to some like 30, 35, then of course we need a new institutional setup and especially a new system of decision-making. And this is made clear by especially Western leaders. They say, we have to, if we want at the same time maintain the cohesion of the Union, we need to shift in many areas from unanimity voting towards qualified majority voting. Because otherwise, if we don't do that, then with the membership of 35, we risk that the decision-making mechanism will be slow and the European Union will be simply unable to take decisions. And if we discuss these projects, right, these proposals to change the voting system, that would mean that the Union should go in the direction of more, I would say, federal type of organization. And we are aware that not all the countries, not all the member states are in favor of that direction. We have countries that are openly against this direction. So the question is how we solve this contradiction. On the one hand, we see encouraging, as I say, encouraging voices coming from Paris and Berlin and other capitals that, okay, we should proceed as fast as possible to give membership to Ukraine and other countries. But there are preconditions, and these preconditions are not accepted by all. So maybe I stop at this moment. I can then, if I have another chance for Europe, then I would develop maybe arguments in favor or against quick enlargement in order to discuss what are the chances, in fact, to make this process really taking place in the horizon that would be, the horizon that would be accepted by both sides, by the Europeans and also by Ukrainian people and other countries that are waiting and that are very much interested in getting to the European Union as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. This is indeed very good outline of all the dilemmas and contradictions which are brought up by bringing up of the issue of enlargement, and they will indeed need to be solved in a new way, which has never been solved before. And since you talked so much about Ukraine, and Ukraine indeed is a very big factor in this conversation, I think I will give the floor next to Kira. Kira, you are very much involved on both sides. You can be seen as a mediator between Ukrainian side and European side. And what is your perception, maybe some reflections to what Dariusz has said, and what is your understanding of the current political moment?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and privilege to be speaking to all of you. Behind me, you see the flags of Ukraine, of my party, and flags of NATO and European Union. And it is because it is written in Ukrainian constitution, the will of Ukrainian people, that our direction is towards NATO and towards European Union. And right now, though we are all fighting the terrifying war that Russia started on us, there is a huge hope amongst Ukrainian people that we would have this as a window of opportunity to have this huge stride towards achieving those goals. As a parliamentarian, I can tell you that we are working extremely hard to complete all the requirements that we received So, for example, from Verkhovna Rada point, for all the 7 points for candidacy that we have received last year, working in secrecy and gathering under the closed doors, we have voted for all the changes that were required from us, all the 7 points of requirements for the candidacy that that were needed. So, as for the current state, we wouldn't know for sure before we hear the report of European Commission that should come within the next couple of months. However, from what we have heard from Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen on the recent statement, it was that the enlargement and all the candidacy and then the membership should be given based on the results. And we do understand that. And from Ukrainian people's side, we see it as a huge opportunity that our partners in the European Union would keep this pressure on the government, on the ruling party, to make sure that the necessary changes would not only be on the legislation side, which we have basically completed, but also on the execution side, which would take more time, and obviously not all the people in charge are interested in making those changes. And we see that there are some blockers and stoppers which is very hard to overcome. However, given that there are, we call it a sandwich situation, when there is a pressure from our partners to implement the reforms, and there is a pressure from Ukrainian people that really demand the government not to forfeit this chance that we have. So this is why this opportunity for us to get the reforms has very good chances. And every single day we are working towards towards making sure that we have some of the items from our lists to have them completed. Every single time Ukrainian parliament is gathering, we have a list of legislations to harmonize our legislation with the EU. And in our list, it is marked with the small EU flag. And usually those changes, they get the constitutional majority of the votes, because everyone understands that we really have to move forward slowly but steadily. There are two other angles that I would like to discuss, and the first and foremost is the geopolitical one. So I totally understand what Dariusz was saying about the issues that are in EU itself and the problems and complications that would come with the EU enlargement. But the question that I have here is, what is the alternative? And then, like, what would happen if the enlargement would not be the path that EU takes? Because you see, the countries that are not members of EU right now, and the countries that are candidates or that are aspired to be candidates, they are the countries where basically the East faces West, and where the fight for democracy, fight against the totalitarian regimes and dominations of Russia and China happen. The key narrative regarding integration to European Union that Russian regime has is, they do not want you there. They do not want you in EU. They do not need you in EU. And these narratives we hear in Western Balkans. We heard them in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion. We hear them loud and clear in Moldova, and definitely we hear them as very strong voices in Georgia. Recently, we have heard from President of Turkey that if EU does not want Turkey, then Turkey may give up on EU. And this is exactly what the political changes in the countries that tend to fall under more authoritarian regimes, this is exactly the narratives that would be used. including including the countries that are members of the EU. And the question is of what are the exact steps, not only promises, but actually the physical steps that need to be taken to overcome this issue. We have discussed with Maria many times the question of the gradual integration, or like having the exact list of items on the wall that countries need to commit to, and the timelines related to that. Because the main issue that we see right now is that it's kind of both sides agree that it needs to happen. Both sides are keen for things to happen, but nobody knows when. Like, for example, there is still a question of when Ukraine can become potentially a member of European Union. There is no answer for that for Western Balkans. There is no answer for all the other countries as well. And though both sides are saying, oh, the ball is on your court, authoritarian regimes strive on it. And so when we are discussing the issue of EU extension for all the countries that are non-EU members but really want to, I would encourage everyone to rise up a couple of abstractions or a couple of levels up and ask, like, what is the end game? What is the goal that we are pursuing? Because basically the moment the EU turns its face on the country, there are many others to bring up their influence. And we know that it is both Russia and China that are really hoping that the unity that is there right now within the European countries, within the democratic countries of the whole world, that at some point it would break up. And the question, the great geopolitical question of what does EU have to answer to that, aside of the promises of extension, of expansion. I don't think that there was any other time in Ukraine's history when we felt Europe and Europeans, and when we were so grateful and so integrated within EU, both by having so many of refugees and members of the families going back and forth and trying to figure out how to straighten our ties. On a political level, I think it is absolutely possible to do all the things that are required. There is a second topic that I want to raise to respond to Dariusz's question on money. As of right now, we understand that it would be over $1 trillion to rebuild Ukraine. And it is obvious that we would not have this amount of money in the nearest future, because even right now we depend on our allies to support us. And for overseeing future, we would depend on everyone right now. So there is a topic that is very painful for our European partners, but it's worth bringing up. It is seizing and using Russian state assets for the sake of Ukraine, or covering for Ukraine's reconstruction. As of right now, there is $500 billion of Russian assets stored in frozen and stored in the countries of EU, in Canada, in the United States, and Japan. These money are right now frozen, and there was a commitment from European Commission to figure out a way of using them for the sake of Ukraine. As of right now, there is not an agreement of proper legal way of doing that. However, this is the path that I see probably the only path of resolving an issue of Ukraine requiring those tremendous funds. So while we should be, and answering to Dariusz, I wonder what's more complicated to do, to come to people of European countries and say, here is the tax that you will have to pay to support Ukraine, or figuring out a legal way of using Russian assets that are frozen and seized, and really making Russia very much frustrated. Those are not easy decisions, but I truly believe that finding a legal way on the proper usage of Russian money is a bit easier than figuring out an additional taxation on people of Europe who are supporting us right now, for which we are incredibly grateful.
Thank you very much, Kira. It was a very passionate, and I cannot resonate more on myself, Ukrainian. It's indeed a view from Ukraine. As you can say, all Ukrainians are fully into the enlargement, into the EU accession state of mind. And here I would like to give the floor to Goran to give us a bit of an overview, if you can summarize how does it look from the Western Balkans, because you work a lot on that region as well, and I know that some of the countries are at this point already very disappointed with how long it took them. What is the mood in that region?
Yeah, thank you very much, and apologies for being on the screen. In a way, I have to prove my feminist credentials by taking care of my kids this weekend. Now, looking from not only from the Balkans perspective, I reside in Berlin and follow these debates in many different levels. The key issue is that, we heard the previous speakers speaking about a lot of different issues. My framing about this is that actually the EU accession debate has become the cork of the bottle that contains the genie of the entire future of the EU debate. And in a way, the Russian aggression on Ukraine, or rather the full-scale aggression, has let that genie out of the bottle. So we really have, we have to be very clear that this is first and foremost a debate that actually the EU member states are having about their own future, and where the accession is a litmus test that actually they cannot avoid. Like in the past, before the aggression on Ukraine, as we all witnessed and we heard the earlier speakers, there was a stalemate on the Western Balkan accession, and that could be afforded. There was also a stalemate on the relationships towards Turkey. Now that time is over. And what's interestingly enough is actually the candidate countries, especially some of them, have more choices than what EU does. Because from a geopolitical and geoeconomic perspective, EU at this moment, with everything that's happening in Ukraine, but not only, cannot afford to basically push the business as usual, because actually it will be very much on the losing side. Now, when we come, I just want to make one point to basically reinforce what other speakers said. There is a major challenge around Ukraine. And we heard it not only about the price tag of the reconstruction, but also a lot of unpopular for many voters, and in particular for some politicians, including some in Central and Eastern Europe, measures that will provide the funds. But I think it's absolutely fundamental that EU thinks of Ukraine holistically, and it builds the reconstruction framework in the future of the mechanisms for the EU accession. And that's why this is important, because it's very unrealistic that it will be able to mainstream Ukraine in all the policies. It will be very difficult to, in parallel, have an accession and then renegotiate with its own members the common agricultural policy or the cohesion funds. And I do believe that part of the solutions will lie in not only using the war as a pretext, but that's actually a very important difference, to have actually negotiations which will be tailored to the conditions on the ground and very much will account for the specificities of the Ukraine. When it comes to the Western Balkans and your specific questions, EU has actually a number of problems, not only with itself and making a decision about that, but actually in a way how to overcome a lot of roadblocks. One of them is not only the stale process and the changing, but as well that EU no longer is trusted in the Balkan capitals. Historically, I'm a national of North Macedonia. My country is a great example of delivering on various conditions, or in order just still to be in the waiting room. And then other leaders take it as an example to say, oh, look, you delivered on all of this, and still you were, you're not negotiating fully and properly for the EU accession, and new conditions abound. Now, that doesn't mean, North Macedonia committed, and they will have to resolve with the change of the constitution, the agreement that they made after the bilateral dispute with Bulgaria, and probably many other disputes. But we are talking here about some fundamental problems also with the bilateral disputes. First and foremost of those, the dispute between Belgrade and Pristina. And this is not only a bilateral dispute in the Balkans. This has large ramifications as long as 5 EU member states have not recognized Kosovo. And this also will have large ramifications in terms of not only geopolitics, but as well what type of countries EU is ready to allow into accession into its frame, because even in the best outcome with Ukraine, with the war that's happening now in Ukraine, or even in the best outcome with Moldova, still we will deal with contested territories and territories that they will need to be sorted out in terms of governance in the years to come. And this is really fundamental. And there we come with one of the other issues where actually, to some extent, let me call it, EU has a clear Serbia problem. This is not to point out Serbia just being critical. Actually, Serbia and its leader, Vučić, have been very pragmatic. But their pragmatism meant balancing the different powers, not putting most of their eggs, and I'm not saying even all, but most of their eggs in the EU basket. And that also shows, in a way, how a relatively small, for Balkan terms actually large, but relatively small in the EU terms, can play this game of a balancing act, which I think is a very, very, not only unfortunate for the region, but it's also a very unfortunate roadblock in the accession process. Now, let me just finish with the how and whens. They were mentioned before, and I think it's really important that we have a clarity about this, because if we only talk about the problems, we will really get bogged down. I think the first and important issue, and the first speaker mentioned it, is really not to wait only for crisis to spring into action European Union. Its geopolitics must be proactive and not only reactive. And in the case of EU accession, they have a clear example where they can do that. They have to start the negotiations. They also have to put for themselves and the countries that want to accede in the EU a very ambitious deadline. Many people advocate for 2030, which sounds unrealistic. But I believe that actually putting something which is a concrete deadline would give us a very clear indication of success or failure, with all the criteria and all the measures that were mentioned before. A number of people talked about staged accession. There's the SEPS proposal. We also heard about other proposals. I think they bring some solutions, and probably they should be used in the coming negotiations, not only the very complicated negotiation model that we have now on the table, but actually try to simplify and as well adjust the negotiation. And here, when I say adjust, this is not to give favors, but it's unrealistic to expect that Ukraine will not need adjustments because of the special situation they are. It's also unrealistic that the countries that are pretty small in the Balkans will not need certain adjustments of the framework. And again, this is not giving favors, this is being practical. Last but not least, I think EU should learn how to play hardball with the toughest players, not only with the weakest. And I think that's yet to come. And this is easier said than done, because when we talk about the European unity, that means also a unity to take maybe even unpopular measures. And that means not only giving the sticks along the carrots, but also that means being very clear about its own economic might. Because eventually, if you look at the economic picture, and we just commissioned at the Open Study Foundations a very telling study about the regional markets, the Open Balkan Initiative, and the Berlin process, in which actually the future of the economic development for the region clearly lies with the European markets, not with its own regional market. And it also gives a lot of incentives. But I stop there. I think we also have to discuss quite a lot of geoeconomics in addition to geopolitics when we talk about accession. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. And concerning the stage integration template, indeed, it's one of the ways that was discussed quite broadly and is being still discussed in Brussels, in the candidate countries' capitals. And the European Liberal Forum has also done quite a lot of work on this framework. If you would like to know more about it, our stand, we have our publication, which is indeed based on a SEPS template, but we suggested some modifications, how to make this process even more tangible, including the deadlines, because deadlines is indeed introducing the notion of temporality, some mutual understanding of how long this process should take and what we can consider indeed failure or success. It's a very big factor on both sides. And at this point, I would like to give the floor to Mira, because you work a lot on the on analyzing the whole process of previous waves of enlargement, and what is your perception on the level of models that can work, lessons that can be taken from previous waves, and do you think the methodology itself needs to change, not only the political narrative, which is already changing from...
Good afternoon, and thank you for the kind invitation on behalf of the EOF. Okay, as far as I see it, first of all, European integration is a process and a constant process, and I see enlargement as something indispensable. But for a year and more, a year now, it has become visibly indispensable, this enlargement, and this is due to the conflict, to the war in Ukraine. What I've seen from the previous experience of the European Union, just comparing the experience of, for example, Central European states and Eastern European states, is that crises somehow make enlargement necessary. They become an impetus for the enlargement. We can see this after the end of the Cold War, and crisis also act as a kind of impetus or stimulus for the European Union to reform as well. And this is like two-sided process. I think one of the speakers mentioned it. We can see it in, for example, in the Maastricht Treaty, then in the Lisbon Treaty. But what we see now is not like this succession of crises, because we see these constant crises since 2008, starting from the financial crisis, then in the Eurozone, you know, the Arab Spring, the revolutions, and then the migration crisis and the COVID crisis. They acted in a controversial way to enlargement. Yes, they consolidated support. The European Union became aware of this solidarity principle, but still enlargement was the background. So the enlargement perspective stood over there, especially for the Western Balkans. What we see with the war in Ukraine is that these soft threats have become hard threats. With Russia, China, although the threat from China has been for several years, especially with the Western Balkans, because China also presents a kind of alternative to European enlargement, right? Because China is seen as an investor who doesn't require any conditionality. Yes, I think that enlargement is a kind of indispensable because it grants a civilizational status. I remember when the debate on enlargement happened in the 1990s in Bulgaria. It was presented, there was a big financial crisis that nearly left us to bankruptcy. Yes, this is how, for example, the currency board happened. And then the enlargement and Bulgaria's accession to the EU was presented as a civilizational choice. So I think that both on behalf of Brussels and also on behalf of the political elites, because sometimes there is some split among them, this should be presented as such a civilizational choice. Should all these states become part of the international community or a society of civilized states, in contrast to autocracies, totalitarian states, and the like. As for, yes, and of course, what I'd also would like to emphasize is that integration is a more complex process because it happens on the horizontal plane, so to say, in terms of geography. The accession of new states, but at the same time it happens vertically. For example, joining the Eurozone and the Schengen area and the like, because you asked what is the perspective, the Bulgarian perspective. Right now, Bulgaria is obsessed with the accession to Schengen and Eurozone. I see that this is also debated kind of Poland, maybe. Yes, and also being like a kind of mentor, the leading example. It's a bit controversial for the Western Balkans. Yes, I see the methodology, accession methodology as merit-based, and of course there should be some, it should become more practical, as the previous speakers mentioned, somehow linked to deadlines, because otherwise, as this happens with the Western Balkans, they become discouraged and they can look for alternatives elsewhere. Okay.
Concerning deadlines, we just noticed a very positive sign, what I consider a signal. The Commissioner for Enlargement, Verkhovna, was just a few days ago, he said that he is actually in favor of introducing deadlines, which was not the case before at all, and that's what I mean. There are signs coming from Brussels that there is understanding that this needs to happen, and it doesn't matter how difficult it is, doesn't matter how many questions it brings up, the enlargement needs to happen. So everyone is busy with the trying to come up with a template which would actually work and make this process a bit more tangible. But then indeed, there are so many big questions which the EU will need to solve, and they are not solvable within a year or two. It will be, it just signifies the whole new stage of the European Union development. And there is no way back, there is only a way forward. And I think at this point everyone already agrees. After the first shock of the war on the continent, now this is already sent into motion, and now it's really the moment to push for changes, and the role of the candidate countries will of course be also very strong. I thank very much all the speakers. We still have a few minutes left if there are questions from the audience. I cannot see well from here. If you have questions, please be brief. You can still come to like 1-2 minutes. Other than that, I would probably give all the speakers a chance, like last 20-30 seconds of closure remarks, because you brought up so many questions and you all commented on each other. What are your overall predictions and expectations from the coming year, let's say, especially looking ahead of the Commission's recommendations and decision on Ukraine and Moldova to open the negotiations, not to open, and then what will be the situation in the Western Balkans also? will this, if there is a positive signal to Ukraine and Moldova, how is it, what message does it send to the Western Balkans? Will it be perceived as okay, enlargement is full speed ahead, or Ukraine and Moldova are being taken ahead of us? Which, please be brief. I'm very sorry, I cannot give you more than 30 minutes each, but yes, Dariusz, please go ahead. 30 seconds.
I'm very much in favor of the enlargement, but as it has been made clear, it depends on fulfillment of certain preconditions, both on the side of the candidate countries and on the side of the European Union. And given that, I would warn against unrealistic and perhaps naive even expectations. This is going to take time. And this is not because, as I said, there is a general reluctance vis-à-vis the enlargement. No, I think there is a prevailing view in Europe that Ukraine has to be admitted and also Western Balkans finally have to join. But as I say, formidable obstacles are on the way to that final goal, right? I very much agree with Kira, what she said about the Russian assets frozen in the West, right? That may solve the problem of the adjustment of the budget, which is always negotiation over the budget. This is a nightmare, as you know, in the European Union. So if we could find a legal solution on that, but the Western countries, they are afraid of going shortcuts in this. Of course, we can use the money which is from the incomes from those assets, but to do something with the assets, the Western countries want to some kind of a legal ground for that. So we see, but when it comes, I know, but when it comes to the decision-making process, decision-making reform, this is even more difficult than the budgetary situation. And there are so many opposing views in the European Union that and I must say I'm not pessimistic, but I'm realistic in this sense that it will take time, unfortunately, and to create false expectations that it may be done overnight or within 1 year or 2 years would be probably counterproductive.
Thank you. I think we're given a couple of more minutes of what I can see on the screen. Thank you. Yeah.
To continue, maybe.
I think it was exhaustive for now. Kira, please be brief.
I know that we were talking today about practicalities. We are talking about the reality and that we should be thinking large and strategically. But I'm here also representing Ukrainian people. And I can tell you the main fuel that we are running on is hope. And what we need to give Ukrainian people is a hope and some path on how it would happen. I want to share a very brief story from last year before we get the candidacy to European Union. Many of my friends, volunteers, engineers, workers, they were going to the front and there were 2 flags that they were tying to their backpacks. One was Ukrainian flag and one was a flag of European Union. And when there were negotiations to get to the candidacy status, my main fear was, what would I tell those people who are fighting right now for us? Can I tell them that they were fighting under the wrong flag? So right now, I want to bring you all not only to the big questions and complications and legal issues and the budget nightmare, but also to the reason why we do what we do. Bigger goal of democracy and freedom and truth, overcoming authoritarian regimes and injustice. About people who live in Ukraine who are thinking about the European path, not as about something that is very practical, but mostly like about the goal and acknowledging of the point that we belong, that we are not Russians and not Russians' brother and not anything like that, that we are Europeans because we share the same values, because we are willing to fight for those values. And every time when we are talking about the challenges and the struggles and impossibilities, I want all of us to keep it here in the heart, in this bigger idea why European Union was created, for what it was created and for whom it was created. With that, thank you so much, and glory to Ukraine.
Героям слава. Thank you very much, Kira. Goran, I think we can give you 15 seconds. I'm sorry.
No problem.
You're muted.
Living in, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, living in Berlin, I have a daily dose of reality. So when I talk about deadlines, actually, I talk about deadlines not only for the accession countries. This is also a deadline for the EU internal debate, because even as the EU is now with 27 member states, it cannot operate and it cannot decide. Macron speaks about multi-speed Europe. Mira, Kaneva actually alert to it. We already exist in partial multi-speed Europe. But I just want to alert that actually this debate about accession may soon become a fundamental debate, in particular in Central and Eastern Europe. And you're in Poland. That will be one of the key countries where we'll discuss whether multi-speed Europe means that some existing members will become second or third tier member states. And when I talk about the deadlines, to me, in a way, and talk about the accession as a litmus test, that means that the accession conversation unearths these fundamental questions. And those fundamental questions, even with or without accession, they have to be answered. And the timeline for those is not more generous than 7 years. Probably it's even shorter. I stop there, although I would gladly talk about economy and money, but maybe in some other occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mira, if you can put it in 15 seconds so we don't...
Okay, because your question, as far as you remember, is whether we're optimistic or rather pessimistic. I'm quite optimistic about the accession of the Western Balkans because I see them as the missing parts of the jigsaw puzzle. I'm also between pragmatic and optimistic about Ukraine and Moldova, and I hope that they can gain from the best practices of accession in packages, as was with the Visegrad group, or having the mentorship, the example, for example, Romania and Moldova, or Poland and Ukraine. They can be the example for them. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you for the audience for staying with us. And I'm not surprised that we had to cross the time limit because it's indeed a very complicated and very timely topic. Thank you for joining us for it, and please come to the European Liberal Forum stand. We have a lot of publication on this issue because we're working quite a lot on this issue. Thank you very much I hope everyone got food for reflection. Thank you.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it. And how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
jestem z zawodu lekarzem. Zajmowałam się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Pan Zbigniew Hołdys.
Zgadza się. Dla znajomych Zbyszek.
Serio? Zbyszek. Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, żeby zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez picu.